Hey everybody, this week we are going to be talking about modes in the blues. Let's get into it. So modes can sometimes be a little bit of an overwhelming or even a scary kind of topic. There's a lot of misinformation out there, confusion about what they are and what they're used for. And we're not going to get into the entirety of what modes are, but we are going to talk about one specific use for them. And that's actually a great way to look at modes or anything else. Not so much, what is this big picture, but how can I use it? What can modes do for me, so to speak, right? And so we're going to look at one way that modes connect to the blues. All right, so the first thing we have to know is that a mode is essentially the same thing as a scale, but it's starting on a different note. So if you have a major scale, there are 7 unique notes in that. And that means there's 7 modes. There's a mode that starts on the first note, the second note, the third note, the fourth note, and the fifth note. Okay? Now, what's interesting about a major scale is that we also have chords built on each one of those notes. So we have first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh chords. And those are all the notes in a key and all the chords in a key. All those things are related. So what we are going to look at is what chord is used in the blues, and then what mode corresponds to that. So what that really means is that those 7 chords in a key, based on each of the 7 notes, each has a mode that corresponds to it. There's the first chord and the first mode, the second chord and the second mode, third and third. And the idea is that that mode, or that sequence of that scale, fits with that chord. All right, we're not going to get into this anymore, just talking about it. We're going to start to do it. So, what are the chords in the blues? Well, let's start with the first one. In a G blues, we have a G, but not just a G major. We have a G7. So the interesting thing about the blues and the G7 is that that is not what the one chord should be. Let me explain. If this was a pop song, and it adhered to all the notes in the major scale, more of a maybe contemporary, middle-of-the-road kind of song, the 7 chord that the 1 chord would be, this G chord, would actually be a G major 7, not a G7. If you don't know what that means, that's okay. A G major 7 has the note F sharp, whereas a G7 has the note F. Now, the reason it should be a G major 7, if we're speaking strictly within the key, is that there's an F sharp in the key. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. So when you build this 7th chord, we should go G, B, D, F sharp. That's the correct, again, not right or wrong, but the diatonic, or from the key, 7th chord for that first chord, G chord. It's a G major 7. Hold on. So the blues uses a G7, and that has an F. So what the blues does, which is really interesting, is it doesn't use the classic or appropriate or diatonic, meaning from the key, 7th chord. It uses a dominant 7th chord. Now here's where it's going to start to come together. The dominant 7th chord is usually the 5 chord, okay? And 5 usually isn't home. 1 is usually home, and 5 is actually pretty far away. So what's interesting is that every one of the chords in the blues is a G7, and then we have the C chord, but it's a C7. And then we have the D chord, and it's a D7. So those 3 chords are not diatonic to any one key. The blues is borrowing notes from outside of other keys. And in fact, the 3 chords, the 3 sounds are all that in that unstable, funky, gritty, dominant 7 chord sound. There's something wrong there. There's still kind of something wrong. Not something wrong with the music, but something wrong in the story, right? Imagine a blues that ended like this. It's too pretty. It doesn't fit. It feels like that's not the blues, right? That was the G major 7. That was the F sharp. It doesn't end like that. It ends like this. There's all that unstable feeling, and that never really goes away in the blues, right? So, if we recognize that this is a dominant 7 chord, and we recognize that that's usually the 5 chord in a key, not the 1, then we can figure out what mode it is. So we actually need the 5th mode, which is called mixolydian. You may have heard of mixolydian. Lots of classic rock songs are deemed to have been written in like a mixolydian mode. Sometimes it's the jam band mode. People refer to it like that because it sounds very, to my ear, Jerry Garcia. Kind of like got that world of like jamming and that funky kind of sound. That's mixolydian. And what we're going to do is we're going to use mixolydian over that chord. So what are the notes of a mixolydian scale? Well, it's exactly the same as a major scale, except for one note is different. It has a flat 7. So in the key of G, that would be G, A, B, C, D, E, not F sharp, but F natural. That's our flat 7 in relationship to G. It's 2 frets down from the G note. G, A, B, C, D, E, F. That's the sound of the blues. There's that F note. It should be, again, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. Much prettier, but that's not the blues. The blues is G7. So our scale, our mixolydian mode, is G, A, B, C, D, E, F. Right? So when I'm playing over a G chord, or G7 I should say, I want to use that mixolydian to kind of play the sound of that 7th chord in a scale form, right? The sound of the 7th chord, the dominant 7th chord, is the 5 of the key. And the 5th mode encapsulates that sound, which is the mixolydian scale, right? So when I play G7, I'm thinking, that's a mixolydian sound. I'm not thinking necessarily, minor, pentatonic. That's another cool choice for the blues, but not what we're focusing on today. I'm thinking mixolydian. G7, G mixolydian. G7, G mixolydian. Now, right there, it just sort of sounds like a scale, but you start to break it up and create melodies out of it. It sounds a little bit more interesting. G7, G mixolydian. G7, G mixolydian. You start to have stuff that's a little bit more colorful, a little bit more interesting, right? So, now the question is, well, is that just our mode that we play for the whole blues? Not exactly, because the C7 chord is also a dominant 7 chord, which means it's also the 5, which means it's actually from a different key entirely. So what we're going to do is when we go to the C7 chord, I'm going to play the C mixolydian scale over that, which is, again, flat 7. It's like C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, but it has a flat 7, so it has a B flat instead of a B natural. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. And the reason that I'm picking this scale over the chord is because that chord is another dominant 7 chord. It's another 5 chord. So I'm picking a scale that encapsulates the sound of that C7. Here's a C7, C mixolydian. C7, C mixolydian. C7, C mixolydian. C7, C mixolydian. it kind of puts me into that world of a C7 chord. Now let's take a step back and ask, why are we switching scales? A lot of times you'll play one note, or one scale, I mean to say, over the whole blues. Well, when you have a 7-note scale or a mode, sometimes you add notes in terms of pentatonic is only 5, now we have 7 notes. Now we've added some notes that don't necessarily work over every chord. So here's an example. In the G mixolydian mode, we have a B note, G, A, B. But in the C mixolydian mode, we have a B flat. So this can cause a little bit of a confusion in the sound if I stay, for example, on the one mode the entire time. Because over the G chord, yes, the B note is going to sound good. But when the C7 comes around, that B note goes to a B flat. So if the backing track or the rhythm player is playing this B flat, and I'm soloing and I'm playing a B, because I'm still playing G mixolydian, you get this. Right? It doesn't sound so great. It works over the G. Here's our open B over G. That note sounded good, you're playing, it sounded good, and then you go to the C7, and all of a sudden that note that previously worked didn't fit. So it works over the G7, but over the C7, it's pretty funky. Over G, over C7. I just wanted to say this to illustrate the idea that sometimes this happens. When you're playing, you have a note that works and then it doesn't work. You're feeling good about what you're playing and then you're feeling lost. And sometimes it's not that like you can't find a note. It's that you did find a note. G or B sounds great over G, but over C7 it doesn't. So the notes actually change in their sound and quality as we go from chord to chord, and we just have to be aware of that. We can't really have a one-size-fits-all approach to soloing over blues unless we're doing a pentatonic, and even in the pentatonic, that doesn't work all of the time. So let's keep going. So we've got a G mixolydian scale for the G chord with a flat 7 of F. We've got a C mixolydian scale over the C7 chord with a flat 7 of B flat. The last chord is a D7, and so we're going to have a D mixolydian chord. D7. Now D mixolydian is the 5 of G. So we're actually playing, funnily enough, the notes of the key of G, but we're focusing them around D because it's a D mixolydian scale. It's D major with a flat 7. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C. Flat 7 of D is C, 2 whole steps down. There's my C note. Up to D. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D. And if I play a D7 chord, and I play a D mixolydian, you kind of get the sound of that D chord, that D7. So ideally what we're doing is we're putting together a scale color palette. The G chord, G mixolydian. The C7 chord, C mixolydian, and the D chord, D mixolydian. And now I have a scale or a color palette that kind of works really nicely with each one of those chords. So how do you practice this? Well, to do this effectively, there are really 3 things we need to do. The first one is simply understand what chord is happening when. There's a blues chart in the PDF which shows you how to count the blues. There's 1 measure of G, a measure of C, and then 2 measures of G. There's 2 measures of C, and then 2 measures of G. The last line, commonly called the turnaround, is 1 measure of D, 1 measure of C, 1 measure of G, and 1 measure of D. And of course, all those chords are the dominant 7 version rather than just the major chord. So why is that item number 1? Well, that's item number 1 because if I can't keep track of where I am, even if I successfully play a C mixolydian and target that B flat, if I don't realize that I'm actually over the G chord because I lost my place, then that's not going to work very well. My whole process, my whole approach is going to go out the window because, yeah, maybe I can play that scale right, but I don't know what chord I'm over. So that's item number 1. Before you even play, before you even worry about notes and patterns, can I follow a blues backing track and keep track of where I am in the backing track? What chord I'm over? Because if we can't do that, we're going to have a real hard time making sense of any of this, because even when you get it right, if you're over the wrong chord, it's not going to be what you're intending. Right? So that's number 1. Can I follow the blues backing track and keep track of where I am within the form? Number 2, can I play the scale? Can I just, in one position, play a G mixolydian, a C mixolydian, and a D mixolydian? If I can't do that, then I'm certainly going to have a tough time doing it when the chords are going around, when the blues is cooking along. If I'm just blanking on a C mixolydian, sitting here with no backing track, no metronome, no pressure, I'm certainly not going to be able to do it in the context of the backing track, right? So this is where art gets very functional. Before we get to play over the backing track and experience, that artistic freedom that some of these concepts will bring us, it's very functional. It's, can I even do that skill? Can I play a C mixolydian? If I can't do it sitting here right now, when I need to and the chord comes around in the jam, in the backing track, there's no way I'm going to be able to do it. So think about this less as, the artistic side of this art form and more of the functional side of this art form. Can I just do this task of playing this certain set of notes in a certain position in a certain key? If I can't, well, that's what I need to work on, so that when I have an opportunity to do that in a musical setting, I will be able to nail it all the time, right? So we have patterns in the log, but we also want to get familiar with the notes. We want to know what the notes are because, the knee-jerk reaction to throw the middle finger down to the B note on the G, that's going to work great, until the chord switches to C. And my knee-jerk reaction of throwing that B note down is actually going to be steering me in the wrong direction. So think of it not as finger practice, but mind practice. When that C7 chord comes around, I don't want to think, first finger. I want to think B flat. Because there's always going to be a different finger in a different position on a different fret and a different string. But if you think B flat, that never changes. Go to a C7, think B flat. When you start to learn the other notes on the neck, go to a C7, think B flat. Think B flat. Think B flat. Wherever you can find a B flat, you can play it with any finger on any string, but you got to think B flat. You can't think middle finger. Because over here, the B flat's under the pinky. And over here, the B flat's under the pinky too. And then over here, it's under the ring finger. Unless you play the chord like this and it's on the middle finger. If you think finger, you're selling yourself short. Think note on every one of these. G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C. That's a flat 7. D. Right? Okay, and let's get to item number 3. It's time to play. Put pieces of those scales over the blues progression. Our goal is not to just play each scale up and down. We want to sequence it. We want to break it up into pieces. So see if you can start to do that and play fragments of the scale over the chord. If you do this, and you do it in rhythm, It might feel like an exercise at first, but it's going to start to sound like music. So here's an example of how I might try to practice this. Remember, we're trying to count the chords first. That's item 1. If I can't do that, that's where I'm starting. Know what chord is happening when. Number 2, can I play the scale just sitting here with no backing track on my own? Can I play G mixolydian? If I can't, that's where I stop and that's where I practice. If I can do those things, I keep on going. Last level, put the backing track on and start to put together fragments of these scales, little melodic ideas and themes and pieces, and thinking about what chord is happening, what notes we're playing. So that's what I'm going to show you. So that's what I'm going to do now, kind of walk through my process as I'm thinking about it, as I'm playing it, so you get an idea of what we're really going for when we're practicing and when we're playing this. All right, here comes the backing track. I'm going to talk through what I'm doing. So I'm starting on G, and then I'm already on C, and already back to G. So I really have to think about those notes. C to the B flat. Back to the B for the G chord. When I go to the D, D, F sharp A, C, B flat, G, E, G, G, F, D, B, G, F sharp. 4-note phrase. 4-note phrase. Just a G note. Here's that C7. Just a little phrase. D7, C7, G, D7. I'm always thinking chord. G goes right to C. C, G. D, C7, G, D. Yeah! Alright, cool. So, there we have it. What we're really aiming to do is use these scales and modes and ideas in any way we want. We can, play a whole line, or we can play a piece of the chord. In that C7, that's the E and the B flat, right? That's a pretty cool sound. We can jump around, play lots of different pieces of the chords and scales. That's kind of up to us, how we use those things. We have been focusing mainly on the real tangible function of the skill of doing this. Like, how do I access these notes and play them, right? So that's what our goal is. So let's review. We talked about a lot of different stuff. The main takeaways are this. The blues is made of 3 dominant 7 chords. Those are actually from 3 different keys. There is no one key that contains all of those notes. We approach each of these chords with a unique scale for each one because they're from 3 different keys. Because they're all dominant 7 chords, they're all the 5 chord of their individual key, which is the mixolydian mode. That's the 5th mode. The mode encapsulates the sound of the chord in a more scale-based way. Dominant 7 sort of corresponds to mixolydian. So we are going to play a mixolydian scale over each chord as it goes by. And we're doing that because we can tap in to the unique sound of each one of those chords as they go by. How do we practice this? The very first thing we can do without the guitar, without anything, follow the form of the 12-bar blues and ask ourselves, well, can I do that? Or am I getting lost? Because you could get all the notes right, all the scales right, play it perfectly, best sound, best rhythm. If you forget where you are in the form and you play over a C7 thinking it's a D7, you're not going to play the right notes because you don't know where you are. So that's item number 1. All the scales and everything doesn't do me any good if I can't follow the form of a blues and figure out where I am, count from G to C to D. That's item 1. Item 2 is, can I play these scales outside of any musical context? as a purely functional skill. This is where art becomes very functional. If I can't sit here and play a G mixolydian, then when the pressure's on, I'm at the gig or I'm jamming or I'm just playing to the backing track and the G chord comes around now, I'm not going to be able to access it then if I can't do it sitting here with no pressure on. So item 2 is work on that functional skill of just playing a G mixolydian scale, or the notes of G mixolydian. If I can't do that now with no pressure, I'm certainly not going to be able to do it to the backing track. Then 3, if we can do that for each chord and we can follow the form of the blues, start to take fragments of those scales played over each chord and start to string together some musical phrases. It's very challenging to get that second step, all those chord scales and notes and that skill. Once we have that, we can start to be a little bit more free with our note choice in terms of what I play and how I play it, and that's where the fun starts to really come together. So hope you enjoyed this. Mixolydian modes over blues. It's a very cool sound, and it's not too crazy. We just have to really put the time and effort in to practice it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.